But I want to start off with the killing of Charlie Kirk and just this epidemic of gun violence that we have here in the United States. My daily take over at Hartmann Report is titled "Killer Democracy: How a Corrupt Supreme Court Turned Debate into Death." Charlie Kirk is dead. So is Democratic Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark. So that's two clearly political assassinations in the past 4 months. By the way, when Hortman was murdered, Donald Trump didn't even bother to call the governor of the state of Minnesota, and basically just shrugged his shoulders. Now it's oh, let's turn Charlie Kirk into a martyr. We can talk about that as the program goes on. I'm no fan of Charlie Kirk, but nobody should be killed for their politics. I mean, it's just that simple. But I think more shocking than what this, and by the way, they just published a picture of the guy that they think is the shooter. It looks like a young man, college student age, and I'm pretty sure they'll be tracking him down pretty quickly. But anyhow, there was this new study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Pediatrics Journal that looked at deaths from more than 250 mass shootings in America. And it's pretty amazing what they found. First off, back in some backstory here. Back in 2008, the guy who was in the NRA's pocket, Anthony Scalia, enthusiastically in the NRA's pocket, in the Heller decision, went looking for some, 17th or 18th century excuse to give the industry an opportunity to sell more guns in America. And, he came up with this phrase, hearth and kin, which sounds 17th century. It actually isn't. but Scalia put it into the Heller decision. I mean, he did the same thing that Sam Alito did with the Dobbs decision, is, basically take some 17th century, with Scalia, or with Alito, with Dobbs, he found some witch, literally a witch-burning judge in England in the 1700s, and said, based on what this guy says, we should, allow states to outlaw abortion. In the case of the Heller decision, Scalia said, based on what some obscure anti-federalist said, we should have more guns. And then 2 years later, there was another decision, McDonald versus Chicago, which was even worse, in which the Chicago gun control laws were struck down. And John Paul Stevens, the Justice John Paul Stevens, in his dissent in that decision said, quote, although the court's decision in this case might be seen as a mere adjunct to its decision in Heller, the consequences could prove far more destructive, quite literally, to our nation's communities and to our constitutional structure. And here we are. Here we are. So what they found when the study in pediatrics, what they found was absolutely astonishing. They looked at the years from 2011 to 2023, and they found that after those two decisions, a bunch of red states loosened their gun laws to the point where in some of these red states you can walk around with literally a semi-automatic weapon of war, strapped to your hip or thrown over your shoulder without even a license, with no oversight whatsoever. On the other hand, there were some blue states who actually figured out ways around those Supreme Court decisions and tightened up their gun control laws. And here's what they found. In the red states that had loosened their gun laws, there were 7,453 more children killed by firearms than the previous trend would have predicted. In other words, these were, unnecessary or unpredicted deaths. In the blue states that had tightened their gun laws, child deaths by firearms actually went down. So, Melissa Hortman was a strong advocate of gun control laws. Charlie Kirk was a big fan of the NRA and opposed them. In fact, one of his more famous quotes is, and I quote, "I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect other God-given rights. That's a prudent deal. It's rational." End of quote from Charlie Kirk. Yes, having people die every year in America is the price we pay for, having the Second Amendment being interpreted the way Republicans on the Supreme Court have done so, since the NRA, with funding from Russia, by the way, started all of their campaigns. The NPR, I mean, just to take this to the next step, NPR reported just this week, this was day before yesterday, that school shootings have spawned a $4 billion industry in the United States that sells everything from bulletproof backpacks to, quote, panic buttons, bullet-resistant whiteboards, facial recognition technology, training simulators, body armor, guns, and tasers. One guy who was a metal detector manufacturer, CEIA USA, he said, it's not right. We need to solve this problem. It's good for business, but we don't need to be selling to schools. And another, Sarah McNeely, she's a sales manager with Sam Medical. They're selling trauma kits that include tourniquets, clotting agents, and chest seals. She said their customers traditionally were EMTs and fire departments, but increasingly it's school districts. I mean, this is just nuts that our government has been, that our country has been flooded with guns because Republicans in our government have been taking all this money from the NRA all these years, some of which came from Russia, which has very strict gun control laws, by the way. It's way past time for our politicians to wake the hell up. And hopefully the assassination of this, far-right gun icon, Charlie Kirk, will cause, some Republicans to break with their power. But so far I haven't heard a word that would indicate that that's the case. But, hope springs eternal. Meanwhile, Kash Patel was yesterday tweeting out, the subject for the horrific shooting today that took the life of Charlie Kirk is now in custody. Where did he get this? It turns out that the FBI fired the head of their field office in Salt Lake City just a couple of weeks ago. She was a decorated, well-regarded Pakistani-American female agent who joined the Bureau after 9/11 and spent years doing counterterrorism work. This was a highly respected person, but she was female and she had brown skin. And so she got fired, and so the Salt Lake City FBI office, I don't know, are they feeding this stuff to Kash Patel? Or is he just, watching Fox News and getting crazy stuff? And then finally, and this is, of course, going to make the right wing go nuts. And by the way, I don't recall when Melissa Holman, who was actually an elected official, Charlie Kirk was never elected to anything, when she was assassinated, the House leader in Minnesota, House of Representatives leader in Minnesota, I don't recall that Fox News went 24/7 for 2 days coverage of her and all this kind of stuff. I don't understand why MSNBC is doing it. But anyway, investigators found, this is from the Wall Street Journal. I'll just share this with you and we'll see what happens. Investigators found an ammunition engraved with expressions of transgender and anti-fascist ideology inside the rifle that authorities believe was used in the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk, according to an internal law enforcement bulletin and a person familiar with the investigation. The older model .30 caliber hunting rifle was discovered in the woods near the scene of Wednesday's shooting at Utah Valley University, wrapped in a towel with a spent cartridge still in the chamber. There were also 3 unspent rounds in the magazine, all with wording on them. Charlie Kirk said of black women leaders, he called Joy Reid, Michelle Obama, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sheila Jackson Lee. He said, quote, "You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken seriously. You had to steal a white person's slot." He called Martin Luther King Jr. awful and not a good person. He said, "We made a huge mistake when we passed the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. These are verbatim quotes from Charlie Kirk. He said, quote, "If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified." He called gay and transgender people groomers. Said, "We must ban trans-affirming care. The entire country, Donald Trump needs to run on this issue." When Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary, Kirk said, quote, 24 years ago, a group of Muslims killed 2,753 people on 9/11. Now a Muslim socialist is on pace to run New York City. He called Islam, quote, the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America. Pretty awful stuff. I just, I don't get all this, oh, it's